Our party of heroes have made it through the elven ruins that lie below a hostile Vellecan fort. Having retrieved the Dwerg's barn by chance already, they now just need a ring from the research labs above them. With the help of a mysterious sorceress, they now enter in disguise the lowest areas of the fort. Welcome to the 4th campaign diary. This is the episode where stuff really starts to pop off in my campaign. Also, this one might be a little long, just warning you, as you can probably tell if you've seen the length already. The word count says I have about 6,000 words for this script, so let's just jump right into it. How about that? At the start of the session, the players have finished leveling up to level 4, as they will be needing it. As they go up the stairs through the previously sealed door, they hear growling sounds up ahead. The next hall they find is partially lit by torches, and there's an open, large set of doors up ahead, clearly where the fighting noises are coming from. The party sneaks up and peeks around the corner. Inside, they see 6 Vellecan soldiers, 2 already dead, fighting against what appear to be 2-headed dogs, as in not 2 dogs with 1 head each, but 2 dogs with 2 heads, and also a 3rd dog with 3 heads? Interestingly enough, this 3rd dog with a 3rd head appears to have the 3rd head literally sewn on between the other 2, and it seems to have some sort of fiery breath coming out of it, or some sort of like red throat with fire in it, and they're not really sure what to think of this. Cyrus the Shadow Sorcerer is the one who looks originally, transmitting this info to the party, peeking around the corner. Now, right off the bat here in this session, we have another example of how things can go a lot differently than you expect, but at the same time, why it's good to leave things open to your players. First off, here's what I expected to happen in this situation. I thought the players would save these Vellecan soldiers who are on patrol or perhaps maybe looking for the lost Dwerg's farm. And I thought the players would save them, trick them into thinking that they're a different group of soldiers, or alternatively get the soldiers to look the other way and ignore the fact that these enemies have infiltrated them out of the life debt, you could say. And this was, I was hoping, going to lead to a tense roleplay situation later, well, coming up soon, you'll find out why, where if they made it, they would have to be confronted by a different guard captain who was asking them about this, and there would be the possibility that these guards might rat them out, or that they might go along with it and tell them, oh yeah, no, they're fine, right? I even had names and personalities written up for these guards, some of them being ones who might be more willing to look the other way or help the group even. Now, on the other hand, here's what actually happened. The players asked if they could close and bar the door, and I figured sure, it described how it closed inwards, so if they pull it shut, and the dogs end up killing the guards, they could just leave, and it would take a while for the dogs to find a way out. And this is exactly what the players do. They end up just closing the door and running on by, and they hear screams as the rest of these soldiers die. Again, not what I expected, but it's a perfectly reasonable decision to make. Of course, morally, you could say maybe a little more dubious, but these are enemies, these aren't friends, so it's kind of like it was sort of playing with testing them a little bit as well, testing what are the moral boundaries of this party. Are they going to watch and let these soldiers who are probably just following orders die? Well, in this case it turns out to be yes, but in a different situation maybe it would have turned out differently. They make it to the next room in the corridor and make it inside, closing the door behind them and barring it. The door leaving this room in the other direction is locked, but I described that the moment Cyrus goes up to the door to lockpick it, it swings open. Standing before the party is the captain of the guard, or a captain of the guard. There are multiple of different ranks, right? But some sort of lieutenant looking dude, and someone who I describe as standing next to him in a fancy robe of sorts, and the players can tell that this is some sort of mage or mage's apprentice. Again, my original plan had been to have the soldiers that they were going to be with, if they had saved them, have a sort of standoff where the soldiers might side with them or might rat them out, depending on what happened between the soldiers and the group. Since they didn't have this, they don't have the added benefit of having more human guards that they could blend in with. But they also don't have the risk of being ratted out by these other soldiers. I tell the players to roll for initiative, with the idea being that if they would fail the negotiation that's about to happen, that they would go into combat. But they convinced me that there was no need to, as the captain isn't actively hostile since they have uniforms on, and the mage guy isn't looking too hostile either. And I thought, fair enough, honestly. There's not really a need to roll initiative. Rolling initiative gives the idea that a combat is inevitable. And so I think the players calling me out on that was a good thing. I think that looking back, they were definitely right. I shouldn't have called for initiative when there's no reason this guard captain would realistically immediately jump to hostile conclusions. Sure, he's going to be suspicious. There's a halfling and a dwarf and only a couple humans with them, and that's a little suspicious in a mostly human garrison, especially when he doesn't recognize any of them. But still, it shouldn't immediately be a combat encounter. So instead, it became a sort of roleplay encounter. One thing was interesting that Watna, the group's dwarven artificer, does have a pet, not a pet, but a construct companion. They put it in uniform as well, and I believe pulled a hood over its head. And obviously this would also be suspicious, but I kind of waved this away. I was like, whatever. He can be standing behind one of the other group members. I wasn't going to make a big deal about this. The group tells the guard captain that they were sent down after a different group of guards and found the escaped dwerg's barn. The captain is a little suspicious that these group of guards he's never met before are here in the more dangerous part of the fort, but he also helps oversee the fort that has a couple hundred people that are in it. And to be fair, their story mostly checks out. They tell him we went down to find this other group. We found Corey here. They don't refer to him by that name they've given him, obviously. But then they tell him that they found the other group of soldiers getting attacked. He's still suspicious, but he asks them a bit more about themselves. They basically tell him to try and avoid these questions. He asks them if they know some other people, and obviously they're just like, yeah, we know them, totally, right? But then they also tell him, also, there are some monstrous hounds down here that are behind us that, they were attacking the guards, that's what we were talking about, and they're probably coming this way, so we should go upstairs. And at this point, he basically says, shit, they're still down here? And he kind of basically lets it slip that these hounds were some sort of experiment or something that was not released but escaped into the dungeon below. And this obviously also makes their captain, the story sound more credible to the captain of the guard here. And but again, even so, he still probes them a little bit more and is asking them, what's going on here? Until at a certain point a snarl rings out. The door gets pummeled into, and the hounds, it seems, have reached the other side of the door they came through. And at this point, the captain is like, okay, you know what, maybe you're right, we can discuss this upstairs. And so they start heading upstairs. This next part is a bit interesting from a DMing perspective, I'll say, especially because I don't think any of the players out of character necessarily realized what I was doing. Although I think that if things had gone the way I expected, it would have been fine. They would have picked up if they wanted to, if that makes sense. But essentially, as the group of PCs start following this guard captain and mage apprentice, I kind of tried to slip them opportunities where they could kill these guys. As normal, I plan for my encounters to be dealt with one at a time, right? I had expected them to kill this guard captain and mage once they had a chance and then continue. But your players can always surprise you. The group had the, well, honestly, fairly reasonable idea that they should just keep playing along as guards. And I figured, you know what, I'll let them if they want to. I'm not going to force them to fight or anything, although I easily could have. I could have just said, oh, the guard captain turns around, sees your artificer construct, and is like, what is that? And then a fight breaks out. Nah, again, if they're willing to go through with this risk, this is a risky plan to keep getting further and further in the presence of guard captains, almost in their custody, right? But I figured I would let them because it is a risky plan, but it could also pay off and it could be more interesting. And to be fair to their thinking, it's fairly reasonable to believe that there are other patrols that could come down and find out if they attack the guard captain here. And they don't know what other encounters are yet to come. This could be a better strategy than they might even know. And so, again, they start heading up a couple levels. I keep trying to insert these opportunities, like, oh, here's a locked door. They're fumbling around with the door for a few minutes. But they keep going. As they do so, the captain basically is telling them that when they get to the top of the stairs, they're going to be stationed to watch the stairs, make sure the hounds don't somehow make it through the couple doors they've gone through, while the captain goes and gets reinforcements. They reach the top of the stairs. They are stationed here. This guard captain tells them, I'm going to go get reinforcements and then we'll go back down altogether. And at the same time, the mage apprentice tells the group that he will lead Corey back to Corey's resting place in the labs. The group gives Corey a look like, you can trust us, dude, and he is led away, and he does trust them, so he doesn't put up a fight or rat them out or anything. However, at this point, right as the captain and the mage round the corner, going the same direction for a bit, then Gamdulfo, the party's bard, casts invisibility on Cyrus, who is already a shadow sorcerer with, I believe, a level of rogue at this point. And it's fairly sneaky. And they Gandulfo casts an invisibility on Cyrus. The idea is that Cyrus would follow the apprentice mage and try to find the ring that they've been sent for, and then sneak back with Corey. This led to a situation where Cyrus was essentially on a stealth mission separate from the rest of the group while the group was waiting. And I think moments like this are fine to have every once in a while. Everyone says don't split the party, but for something like this, it makes sense. It's going to be a lot easier for your shadow sorcerer rogue to sneak in with invisibility than 4 people would have, than the time that 4 people would have going in. Additionally, splitting the party does mean you're splitting the attention, and it'll take longer to get through everything that's happening. But with just one person going off and doing one specific thing, it's not really a big deal. So I describe how, as Cyrus starts going, him and the people he is following, the apprentice mage and Corey, they pass this weird, lumbering, Frankenstein's monster-esque creature. It's a large person or thing who appears to be made up of stitched-together body parts. This is a flesh golem, and it seems to be on patrol. Obviously, there are mages in this research facility, and whenever there are mages, I think there should be some variety. You should have constructs, you should have golems, which are a type of constructs. You should have mage servants or unseen servants, that sort of thing, right? It's always fun to kind of mix up the enemies you have in a mage research facility, or any place that has mages should have, in my opinion, constructs. And so there's this flesh golem on patrol, but it doesn't mess with Cyrus or anything. As Cyrus continues, he follows the mage to the research labs. After passing what appears to be another set of guards on duty with a somewhat more intimidating and trained-looking lieutenant, they reach what is a mix of an arcane and mundane research area. There are alchemy supplies, tomes, and other materials all scattered all around. I had Cyrus make a few stealth checks and lockpick checks to get through the door after the dude. But again, he's invisible, so the stealth checks are with advantage. He's just basically making sure he doesn't trip over something or knock something over, right? Even though I always make my players make stealth checks even when invisible, but they always have advantage because there are other senses that could lead to them being seen. It's just that the primary sense for spotting people is obviously not going to work. So he pretty much aces it and gets into the room that Corey is led into unseen. The mage leaves, and then Corey is left alone, and Cyrus is in here. Cyrus gets Corey freed, explains he's like, I'm invisible, dude, don't worry about it, we're gonna get you out of here. And he also sees the objective that the group has been looking for, a ring that has some sort of clockwork appearance itself, similar to the Dwergsbarna that it is supposedly related to. I've described this ring as looking something like the Ring of Steel Protection in Dark Souls, but with more like clockworky type mechanics and magic-looking elements on it. Now all that Cyrus has to do is concoct a plan to get out, and then the party just has to find a way to get out of the fort and back to the tunnel and back to the boat once they call it using these scrolls that they already have. Simple enough, right? Well, as this is happening, the rest of the group is chilling near the entrance to the downstairs exit. Not much happens at first, But after a few more minutes, a couple more guards trickle in, having been sent by the captain as temporary reinforcements till an actual sort of search party can be put together. After a minute or two more, a couple more guards show up. Again, I was trying to give them opportunities, maybe if now is the time they want to spring their ambush. I was trying to give the players a message that if you wait too long, there will be a lot of guards down here, right? After a minute or two more, the mage apprentice walks back, having delivered Corey to his location. At this point, I thought there was a kind of cool little moment where the group can tell that this guy is a mage, and I thought that pretty much, well, I think it's pretty clever what they did next. They act like they're impressed. They're like, they're playing like their guards who normally don't see this type of magic, aren't normally down here. And so one of them asks the guards, I believe it might have been Gamdulfo, asks the guards, ooh, cool, what type of magics can you do? Trying to draw out spells and also be able to find out what type of magics this guy has. And sure enough, this is a mage from like a rich family, I kind of thought up in the moment, right? Who has some sort of ego, and he takes the bait. He casts Fly on himself, and that's a 3rd level spell, meaning that the group knows this guy is a decent level mage, at least I believe like 5th or 6th level. I'm not sure exactly when you get 3rd level spells. But Fireball is also a 3rd level spell, so obviously he has some other high level spells. And this is a good warning sign for the group. Meanwhile, flashback to Cyrus. Cyrus has thought of a plan. Maybe he could throw together some of the ingredients in this alchemy part of this lab to cause an explosion, and then sneak by the distracted guards. And again, if this works, then all the group has to do is sneak out of the lab, sneak out of the fort, and then they're home free, right? Not too difficult sounding. However, before this even happens, he sees that in the same room there is a chest over in the corner, a very fine, elaborate-looking chest, and his curiosity gets the better of him. He heads over there and tries to use his lockpick on it. He didn't ask to see if he could examine it or anything first, and if you know D&D, in dungeon delving and classic D&D traps, you know where this is going. Of course, this chest in a heavily guarded mage quarters is trapped. And I, as a DM, get to have a little bit of fun. Fortunately, this trap is not a deadly one. I kind of had in my mind, well, they wouldn't use a deadly trap here, because what if just some random soldier wanders in, sees it? They don't want to punish this soldier too much. They just want to stop anyone from getting into it. It has 2 spells cast upon it. The first is Sleep. And because Cyrus doesn't have a lot of HP, Cyrus immediately, falls asleep. He zonks out on the floor. The other spell, and the more alarming one, is Alarm. Haha, the puns, right? So we flash to the other group at this point, because Cyrus is unconscious, is asleep, and he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't even know if Corey was affected. Maybe Corey's out too. But we flash to the other group, and all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, the mage who is flying around stops and orders the group quickly and sternly to follow him. And he starts heading in the direction of the labs. And obviously there's a bit of, dramatic irony? The type of irony where the players know more than the characters do. The players know that the reason why is because Cyrus probably just alerted all the mages, or at least this mage, to the fact that this chest was just meddled with. The characters obviously don't know it. But even still, the characters can tell that something has gone awry with their plan, most likely. And they start to concoct a plan to get out of this situation. Luckily for Cyrus, I flash back to him being woken up by Corey. Corey was not affected and wakes him up, and Cyrus luckily realizes that all he lost was a few seconds of time. And the fact that his presence is now known, although he doesn't necessarily know that. He finishes looting the chest. Now that the magic is gone, it's a normal lockpicking check and it's not too difficult. It only contains a note and a shield. The shield has an elven inscription around the edge of it, and a giant emblazoned eye surrounded by brass paint on the main part of its surface. The note simply says, "Do not use," or something similar in Vellecan. I guess it's a free shield, is basically what Cyrus thinks, and takes it with him. Cyrus starts to finish working on getting his explosion plan together. I believe he had already set most of it up. and starts to make final preparations for his plan. Meanwhile, the rest of the group is following this mage deeper into the fort around a few corners, with a good 5 or 6 other guards as well at this point. The group starts to realize this might be the time to fight. So the group leaps into action as they round a corner. If I remember correctly, Gandulfo opens by casting silence on the area, making it so that everything within a large area pretty much won't be heard. It's magically muffled. The other group members then start shooting at the mage. Luckily for them, mages are pretty squishy, and the mage goes down without even casting a spell, I'm pretty sure. The guards actually do get a few hits in on the group, but the group beats them pretty easily as well. There was a funny moment where in the middle of the fight, the flesh golem shambles around a far corner and approaches them, and the group is nervously looking like, should we attack it? And they're still fighting the guards meanwhile. They decide not to attack it because it doesn't look hostile yet. And it turns out that it's not. It basically walks right over dead guard corpses and then shambles around the next corner. It's going around sort of an island, if you could say that, like a chunk of wall that doesn't have anything around it. And it is just going in a loop. And the reason why it doesn't involve itself is because in my mind, golems are dumb and take orders literally. They don't have like free will or critical thinking, really, right? And so, since the group is wearing uniforms, they look like people who are supposed to be here. Never mind the fact that they have just murdered all these other guards and are still finishing them off. The golem doesn't really understand that. All it knows is if intruders are here who aren't wearing uniforms or anything, then I should attack them. And they're wearing uniforms. And you could say that this was a generous interpretation to avoid having the flesh golem attack the party. But and to a certain extent, you might be right. But to be fair, they have done a pretty good job of keeping their disguises intact. So I figured that I would reward them for that. Interestingly enough, at this point, the main party didn't want to keep pressing forward. If anything, it seemed like they only wanted to take out the mage and the guards because they could tell that they had been alerted by something. So instead, what they did was they started taking the bodies and dragging them back to the staircase leading down and piling them up at the entrance. If I remember correctly, they started dousing them with oil and lighting them on fire to burn the bodies in case more people showed up, to basically make it seem like the hounds had come up. Because at this point, I think the group basically thought that I had described all of these hounds as being hellhounds. Interestingly enough, I'd only described one as having a third head that was a grafted on hellhound, which are, if you don't know, if you haven't played D&D, hellhounds are fire-breathing demonic hounds and stuff, and the group fought plenty of those last campaign. But interestingly enough, these hounds, most of them don't have the ability to breathe fire, but at least one does, so I was like, and the guards in here who know about the hounds know that, so it makes sense, and it still made sense that they would try to make it pass for hellhounds, having burnt these guard corpses and covering so that at least they can have the benefit of the doubt when it comes to finding a bunch of dead guards when more show up. Meanwhile, Cyrus has concocted some sort of explosion ready to blow in the alchemy lab. There's a long hall with some statues to hide behind, and then near the end of the hall, a branching path where the other group of guards is, and then a door leading to the main hallways, and then those halls lead to the group. There's not too many, as far as Cyrus knows, there's not too many obstacles besides the flesh golem at that point. So Cyrus gets Corey and himself to hide behind a statue in the corner of the hall, and then sets off the fuse that he had rigged together. And boom! The explosion works, and I describe how it's even bigger than he had expected. The whole lab on the other side of the hall looks pretty much wrecked. The guards obviously come and investigate, and Cyrus and Corey begin to try to run by them stealthily. Unfortunately, they are seen by one of the guards. I believe I rolled perception checks versus his stealth, as these guards are actively searching. And luckily, Cyrus is a shadow sorcerer again. So even though they're spotted and all of a sudden they start getting chased by these guards, Cyrus casts a bunch of magical darkness that only himself can really see through out of the people here. He starts running through, dragging Corey behind him. The other guards are all stumbling around, slashing out in the darkness, and they run back into the hallway towards the rest of the group. They make it to the rest of the group, albeit now pursued by a group of guards, including a fairly well-trained guard captain. The rest of the group meets Cyrus, hears the commotion, and before they even start running, they tell Gandulfo to start using the scrolls of sending he has to start getting in contact with the captain of the ship, telling him to come pick them up. The way spell scrolls work in D&D, if you don't know, is that if you wish to cast a spell of higher level than you can normally cast, you must make a check to see if you can actually use it. Otherwise, it turns to dust, or otherwise becomes unusable. Gandulfo has a decent spellcasting ability, but does need to make these checks to see if he can even cast the sending spell using these scrolls. And if he messes up, they only have 2 scrolls. If he messes up twice, they don't really have a way to contact their getaway ride. And unfortunately, luck can make even the best spellcaster fail. Gandulfo uses the first scroll while the rest of the group fights, and he fails. The next round, he uses the second, and he fails again. Meanwhile, the rest of the group is busy fighting off these guards that have shown up. Now, obviously, as the DM, this is not too great, because I know that the next big story beat and the next big dramatic moment are meant to happen when they're picked up by their ship. I want them to get to that point. I could have changed things and had it work out a different way, but I had a backup to make it go the way I wanted, while still making it feel not just like I was giving them and throwing them a bone, although obviously it probably still felt a little bit like that, as you'll see. As the group is fighting, I had a few players make perception checks. The players are like, sure, they'll make it. Although I think a couple were worried that it might be another bad thing approaching, like the hounds coming up or something. But no, in reality, I told them that a couple of the sconces on the walls nearby looked strange. They weren't lit. It had a much different look than the other sconces nearby. I tell Jack, the player playing Watna the Dwarven Artificer, that he succeeds, and his dwarf knows that these type of sconces are actually magical switches that activate if you cast magic on them. I think, again, the players did kind of realize I was giving them some way out of this situation. And so Watna, on his turn, casts a single cantrip spell on one of these sconces. Sure enough, it lights up and starts to glow with some sort of magical aura. He yells to the group to do the same with the other sconce, and I believe Cyrus or Gandulfo does the same on their turn. As the second one ignites, then a wall starts to rise, a section of wall starts to rise. It turns out there was a secret door next to them here the whole time. The group quickly rushes in, and they see 2 sconces inside as well. Casting those, the wall closes again. There was a really cool moment here where Gandulfo uses his bard ability to give everyone, or one of his bard abilities, to give everyone a moment where they can use a reaction to move without provoking attacks of opportunity. It's been very helpful this campaign so far, and I'm sure Gandulfo will use it to good effect in the future, right? Well, the rest of the group runs in. They quickly cast on the 2 sconces inside the secret door. The door closes shut again. As it closes, they see the enemy guard captain chugging a potion, quaffing a potion, and he begins to grow in size till he's the size of a Dalian giant, a 10 or 11 foot tall giant-looking dude. He used a potion of growth, and he starts bashing at the wall as he is getting cut off from his enemies. But the door remains closed, and since it's not just a door, it is literally a section of stone wall, they seem to be safe for now. The group finds himself in what appears to be a fairly well-kept secret study. It's actually a secret study of one of the more senior mages, not that they need to know that. Of course, this gives me a chance to say, oh hey, there's a bunch of magical scrolls in here. Of course, they still had to make some checks to find a sending scroll among the mess, but they find a couple of other scrolls in the process. Eventually, while they're still here pounding on the wall, they hear, and they're hearing the deep voice of the giant guard yelling surrender over and over again, or come out and fight. Gandulfo finds another sending scroll, and finally on this one he succeeds. he sends a message to the captain. It can only be 25 words, but he basically says, we're ready to be picked up. We'll be here as soon as possible. And he responds back. The captain, Bort the Butcher, responds back telling them, we're on the way and we'll be there as soon as possible. Suddenly, after a few minutes or a few more moments, the yelling on the other, as the group is sort of concocting a plan to break out of here, the group hears that the yelling on the other side stops. They hear the distant ringing of alarm bells from further up in the fort, and they hear the guards that were outside running away. The group is not really sure why this is happening, but they are not going to turn down their noses at this opportunity. They quickly reopen the door and begin to run past where the guards are running away now. A couple of them might even look back and see them and yell out. But they run past the guards and they start to run down the stairs and get the hell out of this fort. At this point, I used what many others call a skill challenge, which is not a thing I invented. I took the idea from Matt Colville, who I've referenced many times on this channel, who I believe took it from the 4th edition of D&D, so I don't even think it's a third-party thing. I believe it's just something from 4th edition. Of course, I've never played 4th edition, so I have basically just taken what I've liked from Matt Colville's description of it and implemented it in my game. So it's on its 3rd iteration of just using things from other people, rather than necessarily using them from a source book. Essentially, the group goes through a series of skill checks to see if they complete an objective. In this case, the objective being reaching the exit of the fort the way they came before any enemies catch them. Success means a successful getaway. Failure, in this case, means they'll have to fight their way out. The thing about these skill checks is that it's up to the players to decide who uses what skill. Each one can only use each skill once. I also allow them to use equipment or spells in my version of skill challenges. If they can pitch a clever way to use a single spell or a single bit of equipment in a way that would really disrupt the enemy or environment or whatever they're fighting against, I figure why not let it count as a success. I believe in Matt Colville's video about skill challenges, which I'll include a link to below, he discusses how he always has 3 failures be the limit for failure, and the number of successes be different based on how hard the challenge should be. For me, I oftentimes make it a little harder. Only 2 failures is needed for a complete failure of the overall challenge, especially if the stakes are fairly low. In this case, if the group had failed, they would have had to fight a mid-level mage, but 4v1, it would have been no real issue, and it wouldn't really have mattered. So I had it be 2 successes, and I believe either 3 or 4 successes, two failures to fail, 3 or 4 successes to succeed on the challenge. I will say that this one went pretty easily, and I don't think that it was much of an issue at all. I think they succeeded 3 or 4 times in a row without any failures at all. But I do also still think that you might say, well, at that point, why include them? Well, because I think it's a cool way to encourage the players to get involved with the description of how they use their gear, how they use their abilities to get out of tricky situations. And in this case, it was no different. At the very start, they set alight the bodies from before and poured flaming oil onto the stairs going down after they had gone down, obviously. And obviously, that will slow their enemies down. I thought that's a great way of using oil, casting a flask of oil on the stairs to create a big flaming mess that the soldiers will have to get through. Sure, a magic user might be able to get through it, but again, it's going to slow down people. And so that counted as a success. At a later point, they threw a bunch of caltrops and ball bearings. They emptied 2 bags of ball bearings or something like that on a staircase. And even then, after that, Cyrus cast another ball of shadow over the stairs. So the soldiers running out are going to have to, in the dark, navigate caltrops and ball bearings spread all over a staircase. And I was like, yeah, no, that's definitely a success. There's no way any normal guard is getting through here without falling on their ass or worse. And so the group makes it through this run out the dungeon. They had a couple other things they did, but again, I thought it was cool overall. They describe how they use their abilities, and they make it through the dungeon relatively unscathed, with both the ring of the Dwerg's Barna and the Dwerg's Barn that it relates to. They rush to the pool of water that they had swam up through in the beginning and take their water-breathing pills before diving back in and swimming towards freedom. Of course, I describe how this whole process of the skill challenge took about 20 to 30 minutes running through this area that had taken them hours to explore, so the group knows that the ship has probably had enough time to rush in with galley rowers going at full speed and everything. As the group swims out of the tunnel exit, they find themselves in the Middlesea, and they can tell even through the water that it's about dusk. They had only been in the fort for less than a full day, in fact. They started in early morning, and now it's late evening, and they are done with their mission as far as I can tell. As the group swims up towards their ship, they'd recognize it from anywhere, even from below. They notice that everything around the ship seems fairly obscured, which, to be fair, it makes sense because they intentionally had been given a fog-making magic consumable, 2 of them, one for the way in, which had already been used, and one for the way back in to pick them up and then out. And so they knew that there was going to be fog all around the ship for a couple miles around, I believe. And it seems pretty thick. It seems like it's holding on pretty thick even late at night when it wouldn't necessarily make sense to have fog in general without a storm or anything. The group clambers up a net that was thrown overboard, not helped over by anyone, though, which is a little weird, spilling onto the deck, where they look up and see that the whole deck, the entire ship deck, is swarming with Vellecan soldiers. They're on their ship, too. This is the right place. But the ship is swarming with Vellecan soldiers. They see part of their crew is shackled or bound or just being held with their hands behind their head, kneeling down in different places. And Bort the Butcher, their captain, who they just received a message from about 30 minutes ago, is gagged and has a sword at his neck. A sword held by an imposing-looking man in full Vellecan armor. Next to this man on one side is a woman in full armor and regalia as well, with a nasty look on her face and her hair held up in a bun. On the other side is a cloaked man, also with Vellecan symbols, but who looks much more shady and whose gleaming, mad smile can barely be seen. This is the group's introduction to Alvaro the Eagle, or Alvaro the Eagle. He is the prime consul of the sea of the Vellecan Empire. In other words, this is the man in charge of the largest navy of the Middlesea, the navy of the Vellecan Empire. And in one fell swoop, this man has foiled an enemy plot against his country and taken captive of one of his pirate rivals and counterparts Bort the Butcher. And now he's also taken the group captive. This is when the group realizes that this is what they had been promised with the buy-in to this campaign. They knew that going into this campaign, I had told them and asked them if they would be cool with this. They knew going into this campaign that the buy-in was their crew would face a deep failure, a critical failure of a mission. The whole first arc was going to be them playing through this failure of a first mission. That would be the backdrop for the whole campaign. Obviously, we could have started after this failure, but I figured, and they kind of, agreed to go along with the idea that letting them live through this failure would anchor them more in the world, give them a little bit more of a sense of what they lost, what this failure meant, and knowing who exactly destroyed their previous crew. In other words, it lets me, as the dungeon master and the one orchestrating the bad guys of this campaign, it lets me set up the Vellecan Empire as some of the villains of this campaign. Of course, the players didn't know that this was coming exactly, but at this point, I kind of made it clear. I told them there's no viable escape here, right? You could jump off into the water. You're just going to get caught eventually. I just told them that so they'd realize that this is the part where it's going to be almost more like a cutscene. I kind of told them that. This is literally going to be almost like a cinematic or a cutscene, a dialogue cutscene. And one thing that is important to note here is that I don't think it's often a good idea to purposely set up your group of players for failure in any given situation. People don't play D&D in general to surrender or to lose. Some groups, including mine, will have more reasonable approaches and say that, oh, well, the odds are against us here, we should probably surrender, and our characters probably would. But in general, people don't want to show up to play D&D and then be told that they need to surrender, right? And so I don't think this is normally a good idea, but if you're going to do it, I think that there is a right way, and I think part of that is by doing this. Tell them in advance, get them to buy into the idea that they're going to live through a failure so that the rest of the campaign is based on that. And also let them know, give them the idea that this is going to be like a cutscene, and you have to trust me that on the other end, it will be better. You'll have an opportunity to be spit out at a better location, a better situation. And this is also something that Matt Colville made a video about. He literally had a video called Cinematics that is basically about this idea. You can do stuff like this. Just go to the players out of game on a meta level and just tell them, if you play along with this, I promise you'll be in a better spot. You don't need to be secretive with stuff like this. They don't know what is going to happen, but you can still tell them something bad is going to happen. And if they're okay with it, be like, yeah, it'll spit you out at a better place in the end. And I think that's a much better way to handle something like this. In any case, the group realizes that this is the moment that they are supposed to surrender, as they stagger to their feet, surrounded by dozens upon dozens of enemy soldiers and even war mages. Alvaro the Eagle starts to monologue, as all good villains do, and I'm not going to go into all the details of what he says, but as he starts to do so, he signals up to a mage up in the castle of the galley, who signals someone else off-boat. All of a sudden, the fog lifts to reveal the true plight of the group. There are at least a couple dozen Vellecan galleys and other ships surrounding them, as well as what appear to be a few pirate galleys in the now clear sunset waters. I describe how the players recognize two infamous pirates at the helms of nearby ships. Actually, one of the pirates is quickly joins them on this ship. But one of the pirates, who is on their own ship a little distance away, is named Lascia l'Invisibile. I gotta practice my Italian pronunciation. Lascia l'Invisibile. Lascia l'Invisibile, there we go, who is famous for her use of fog screens, but also for her implicit support of her homeland empire of Velleca. She's somewhat more of like a privateer who often works with the Vellecans and preys on merchants from other realms. As well as the elven pirate Mirix, who again quickly joins Alvaro the Eagle on the group's galley. Mirix of Exteria, known for his soft-spoken ways, but his deadly nature. Somewhat rightly, Jack, playing the dwarven artificer Watna, remarks, "Did you really need this many ships and soldiers just for a single crew of pirates?" And that's a pretty good retort or insult, and this was kind of in the middle of the monologue and kind of took me aback. I basically just had to play Alvaro as ignoring this, because it's a good point, it's a good kind of mocking insult, right? Did you really need this many dudes just for us, right? And Alvaro didn't, but the players don't know this, but there is personal beef between him and Bort. And so this insult, while it is a good one, he mostly just ignores it. Alvaro basically begins to boast about how he's finally managed to catch the infamous Bort the Butcher, and he asks the group if they'd kindly be willing to hand over the ring they took, the Dwergsbarn himself, as well as the shield that they have taken as well. And without much choice, the group gives it back over. Again, Corey is taken from the group, and there's not much they can do to stop it, but at least they know that from what Corey told them, it didn't seem like he'd been maltreated, and Alvaro doesn't seem like he's really going to punish the Dwergsbarn for its attempt to escape. At this point, Alvaro says something along the lines of,
"And for our helpful friend, you've finished your job now. Feel free to step forward and receive your reward."
A couple of Vellecan soldiers heave forward a decent-sized chest, the sounds of coin jingling from within. And stepping forward from the rest of the group is Gamdulfo, the halfling bard of the party. He walks forward, flashes a smile towards the rest of the group, and says a line they've heard him say a few times already in this campaign alone. "It's just business, friends." Something along those lines. He walks over and stands next to the soldiers, eyeing his gold. As it turns out, The Middlesea can be a harsh business world, a dog-eat-dog world, and secrets can be bought. Gandulfo has, since the first session, been an informant of the Vellecans, and that's why they're here, and that is why the group has failed. Without playing with cameras or in person with the people of my group, I have no way to know exactly how this hit with the players. But they were definitely a little pissed that this character they'd now been playing with for 4 sessions had just betrayed them. And I definitely think they were at least a bit surprised. And well, that was kind of the point. Let me take a moment here to describe the behind the scenes that went into this. I knew from months before the game started that I wanted to do something unique with this opening arc. I figured since the players have bought into the idea of playing through what they know will be a failure, why not make it more interesting and involve a player with that failure? Make it feel personal, that one of the party would betray the party. In addition, for this campaign, I have had, ever since I came up with the idea for this, I've had the players each make multiple different characters. The idea is that the other characters they make are background NPC members of the crew, other officers of the crew, and that even if the players die, if the characters of the players die, or they get really bored with one, they can switch to another one. And it makes more sense than having a completely random new crew member join up and now be one of the leaders, right? The idea is that each of them has a few backup characters who are in the background and who at some point will be promoted if a player character reaches their unfortunate end. So when I came up with the idea of having a literal party betrayal, I approached Dragery, one of the players in my campaign group, to see if he'd be interested. He likes the roleplay aspects of D&D a lot, so I thought he'd be down, and he agreed. Over about a year, which is as long as it actually took to get this campaign going, him and I went back and forth planning this. I didn't tell him specifics until they happened, but essentially I told him that he would start playing as a secondary character, a fake character, and he would at some point off-screen be offered money by the Vellecans to rat out the party, and that he should figure out what type of fake character he'd have fun playing for a few sessions to do this. So that's largely what led up to Gandulfo being the way he was, a flamboyant, well-focused, but admittedly charismatic character who the party probably had reason to be suspicious of with how money-focused he was. During the start of the first session, I DM'd Drake on Discord about the fact that this whole deal was done during the layover in Aravensa. All this happened off-screen, and he was getting this information just as quickly as the rest of the party was, really. They didn't know that about this off-screen stuff, this background thing that was happening. But he didn't know about all this in advance. But it was still well planned, and although I left out a lot of the details so that he would have some fun discovering what was happening too, I did tell him a lot. I basically told him that he knew the plan was probably going to fail, his character did, and I even told him what the rough line of dialogue would be for him to reveal himself. Alvaro the Eagle saying, "Step forward and receive your reward," right? He didn't know who would be saying that, or when, or in what situation, what circumstances, but I told him that line is what he should listen for to reveal himself. That was his cue. And again, of course, Dragery already had his real character ready. And skipping ahead again to the reveal, I pretty much immediately after told the players Gandulfo is now an NPC, and if you want him to be an enemy of the crew, if you deem him worthy of enemyship, is that a word? Drake will now be playing his backup character, or his actual real character, the first mate. And again, I can't speak for Drake, but I think he really enjoyed having this sort of secret role in the narrative of the opening of the campaign, and I certainly had fun planning it. And also, I think the players will certainly remember this. They were pissed in the moment, right? In and out of character. But I think that they will remember this, and I definitely think it was. I think it was dramatic, and that was the goal. I think it's also kind of funny that the players were a little bit confused before this point, going back, right? I think the players were confused as to why Drake had started off not playing his real character, the first mate. You see, we had agreed before the start of this campaign out of character that Drake would play the leader of the crew. They wanted him to have a chance to have a more roleplay heavy role that would have a lot of the decision making fall to him. And his backup character was, or the character he didn't start playing as, was the first mate. Normally, the person who would be elected to the new captain would be the first mate. So they were like, why are you playing as this character who is the steward, a minor role, instead? Right? The Gandulfo, the greedy steward. Why aren't you playing as the first mate right off the bat? And so, of course, Drake and I knew that this would be because he would switch to that character. He would be playing that character. But obviously we couldn't let slip why. So I basically told the group, oh, well, there's no reason the steward or anyone else couldn't be elected captain. And that seemed to get them off the trail whenever it came up, right? In reality, we knew that, no, they have a good point. But it's fine for, to make a dramatic moment, it's fine to have a little white lie like that in the moment, right? To trick your players a little bit. In any case, now that Gandulfo has revealed himself as a betrayer, and now that Alvaro has demanded that they hand over their stolen goods, the group are essentially rounded up to be passed to control of Mirix, the elven pirate. Multiple ships pull up next to the group's starting ship, including a large sail-driven flagship that looks to be mostly manned by elves right now, but has Vellecan markings on it. It's called L'Albatro Azzurro, or the Blue Albatross, and that is obvious from the large blue albatross painted on its side. The group around this time figures out that Mirix offered to help Alvaro in return for two things. Well, a few more things, but mainly two things. One of them being a new flagship, and this is that flagship. And the other being in control, or being able to, basically being given captive, Bort the Butcher, the captain of the crew, as well as the other senior officers of Bort's crew to be dealt with as Mirix pleases. Apparently, old rivalries are common and run deep in the Middlesea. Bort is not only the old rival or old enemy of Alvaro the Eagle, but also Mirix the Soft-Spoken. And so, as the group is being essentially corralled onto this ship, they're not sure where they're going to be taken. Their weapons are taken from them, but it seems like they're going to be taken captive. And this is essentially where the session ended. However, one more notable narrative thing does happen. I described that as they are being taken off of their old ship, walked over a gangplank or something, they see Bort manage to spit out his gag. He manages to even with his hands bound, he manages to kind of wrestle his mouth free. He says a few inaudible words from where the players are to Alvaro. And Alvaro, enraged by whatever words Bort has spoken, turns, draws his blade from its sheath, and smites Bort's head clean off of his shoulders. I think the players were a bit shocked by how matter-of-fact I described it. The fact that Bort is beheaded right there for saying a few words. And apparently, the players weren't the only ones stunned by this. The elf Mirix, who is supposedly now their captor, and again, is known for being well-spoken and soft-spoken, begins to yell at Alvaro, actually draws his blade and points it at Alvaro. And the group can't really hear what's going on, but it seems like there's some conflict, and they're paused in their process of being shuffled over the new ship as the Elven and Vellecan soldiers on both vessels are kind of looking at each other with suspicion. And this is going to be something that is repeated through the next session or two. But they watch, and they can't really hear exactly what's going on. There's a lot of noise and stuff. But it seems like Mirix is unhappy with what just happened. Mirix, although they don't know this necessarily, they kind of put it together that Mirix wanted to have Bort to do with what he wanted, right? He didn't want to watch him get beheaded. He wanted to be the one to choose how Bort died or was punished for whatever rivalry they had in the past. And so finally, there is a resolution as Mirix points his blade to the shield now sitting at Alvaro's hip. A familiar shield, the one that was taken by Cyrus from a trapped magical chest less than a few hours before. And when Alvaro sighs and hands it over, Mirix seems to be satisfied by this. The group's old vessel continues to be looted. Their old companion Gandulfo and Alvaro the Eagle rejoin Alvaro's flagship, and the group are taken to prisoner cells. And who knows how or when they'll find a way out. And that was the end of the session. Obviously, this was a long video, but I'm hoping that you enjoyed it. A lot of stuff happened this session, from a dungeon crawling and sort of classic D&D perspective, as well as a narrative one. Obviously, there was a few combat situations. There was a sort of, I got a chance to have a trap, which is always classic D&D. I had a chance for these cool stealth checks and a bunch of other things, a skill challenge, and then to top it all off at the end, this more cinematic encounter, which I don't think I'm not the best at doing, at acting out characters, especially villains, extemporaneously, but I think it went well enough. I think just the situation itself lended itself to the drama, and I think it went fairly well. As far as a few DMing lessons, there's a couple things that we'll talk about real quick before wrapping this video up. The first is that, again, it's fine if the group does unexpected things. I've talked about this in previous campaign diaries, but I had fully expected them here to fight each encounter one at a time. But they decided to actually use the uniforms and fool their way into the fort, so I let them go for it. They bypassed a few encounters, but it sure was a lot riskier and a lot more tense the whole time, as enemies were all around them. If they made the wrong move or were found out, they would have had to fight a lot more enemies than I had expected or planned for, right? And in the end, I think it made the dungeon more exciting rather than less exciting. The other thing that I think was a cool lesson is that and this is again something that paid off over the course of about a year of work, is that it can be super cool and fun to work with certain players behind the rest of the group's back to create cool narrative moments like the betrayal of Gandulfo here. As long as you plan for it ahead of time and make it work make it work in a situation, you want to make sure that everyone's still having fun. You don't want it to be that one player goes and kills another player's character without them knowing it's coming, right? You want it to be something that maybe affects everyone equally, but is still going to be a situation that in the end will work out for the player. You don't want it to be something that leads to a TPK. And if you can do that, I think it can be really fun. Again, you don't want to ruin everyone's fun by working with one player behind the group's back, but if you can make it so it makes a cool dramatic moment that still is going to fit in with the rest of what's going on, it can be, I think, a really fun time. And I think the same thing goes just in general for the fact that the group literally played out a failure of a mission here. If you plan for stuff like this and the players know that they should expect failure, or that they know that you're going to give them an out eventually, in other words, if they know this will be a dramatic moment but not a TPK, then I think it can work out. It's not the normal expected outcome, which is why you should make sure they know and that they buy into the idea. But with the buy-in, I think you can make some cool things. I think a lesson to be taken is that it can be really fun to do things that aren't normal, as long as everyone is bought into the idea, as long as you work to make it, you do the work to make sure everything works out. And again, make sure everyone is having fun. It wouldn't have worked if Gandulfo did this and then the party had no chance to counteract this or whatever, and they just all died or something. But yeah, and with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I think the next video will be a lot shorter. There's not as much that happens in the next session. We've played twice now since this last time, and both of them have been pretty alright sessions, I think. And so I'm hoping to do that soon. I'm also hoping to make a different one-off video soon. I think people enjoyed the Wonders of the World video I did for world building, and if you haven't seen that, I recommend checking out. I'm pretty proud of it, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I would also love to know your thoughts on this campaign diary. Feel free to comment below or whatever, and yeah, I'll hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye.